join me in welcoming Mary Grigleski.
So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're diving into the wonderfully weird world of generative AI or ChatGPT. So buckle up. We're going to embark on this journey full of ironies, paradoxes, and contradictions to make your head spin like the GPUs or graphical processing units that are used for training all of these large language models. So sit back and enjoy. So first, let's start with the elephant in the room, or should I say, actually the robot in the room. Let's do that. So generative AI, right, is supposed to be creative, right? Because of the name generative. But here's the kicker. It's essentially the world's most sophisticated copycat. It's like the friend who always says, I wish I had thought of it. And actually, in this time, it actually is, in fact, thinking of it too. I've done doing that. So sort of. So imagine a comedian, a stand-up comedian who's hilarious, but has never thought of any original thought. And that's generative AI for you. It's just a brilliant remix of all of this human knowledge and creativity. It's actually the DJ of the intellectual world, and just doing these remakes of irregular beats from records, recordings of human knowledge, and that's what it is. And next up too, we'll take a look too at this paradox of knowledge. So generative AI models, like ChatGPT, they are veritable fonts of information. It kind of consumes, it's trained on huge amounts of corpus of data. This is in machine learning terms, so huge amounts of data. So they can discuss quantum physics, right? 16th century French poetry, and the intricacies of making sourdough bread, all these things, like you ask it, or most of the things, right? And so in the same conversation, so it's very impressive, is that right? But here's the twist. They actually don't know anything because there's no emotion. It doesn't actually know anything. It's kind of, think of it like the guy, in a party you go to, and it seems like he's very smart. He can talk about anything. But until you kind of ask more and more, maybe it gets to a point you realize that it is just paraphrasing Wikipedia data. So there's just basically the technology behind the scenes is doing these word associations. So it is actually a very advanced game that it's engaged in, playing these word associations. So they are really, essentially the fake it till you make it type of success story. Now, then comes to the part of productivity, right? Can we actually really trust this technology? So generative AI is supposed to be the incredible time saver. And again, you ask it to do things, like writing emails, writing a blog post, designing a dress, composing music, for example. And it saves time. It can do all of these things. But think about it. Is it really saving time? Not really. The reason is that it's got all these issues that you have to deal with, especially we are technologists. We actually realize we have to verify the information is correct. And we can't really trust this ChatGPT too much. But in order to understand why, so let's delve a bit into some technical details. So bear with me, I work with technical stuff too. So it's important to understand that it's relying on all of these large language models. So these are models, think of them, they are kind of an interpreter of the commands, or so to speak, right? We call it commands are basically you go to a ChatGPT, you ask all the questions, it will interpret it, right? And it's not really intelligent the way that we perceive it to be. They are just statistical models behind the scenes, right? It's doing what we call in mathematical terms, recognizing some patterns in these data that it has. So borrowing the words, of technologists, the open source leader at Verizon, Dirk Handel, he explained or he described these models. They are just essentially autocorrect on steroids. And that's what it is. So the reliance on these patterns means that these models, it lacks judgment and reasoning. It cannot tell right from wrong, left to right, all these things. It just kind of essentially deals with all the statistical results and spit it out for you. And it sounds like, oh, it's really good. But it's basically, too, if it doesn't have the knowledge, then it hallucinates, right? And it's basically giving you wrong thing. And I can quote an example. I did it before using an older GPT-2 model, and I was asking him some question, and I was listening to some music. I said, please, who is this artist? What does he do? And instead of telling me that I don't know, this GPT-2 came back swearing at me, was saying that, why do you ask me such question? And of course, I won't say the swear words now. I was like, what? And that was actually an older model too. So as you can see, right, there's a lot of unpredictability in these models. And it stems from the fact that these models, can behave in ways that's not fully understood, even sometimes with developers, scientists too. So it's kind of very challenging. And like our earlier speech done by Dr. Fortnow was saying that essentially too, we don't know what will happen. We don't know what the outcome is. It can be harmful. So we have to be very careful with it. And another significant contributor to this unpredictability is actually because of the issue of bias in it too. So as such, how it can actually figure out answers is based on what you feed into it, the data. So say, for example, I'm training this, this model, and I'm using images of mostly, let's say, white individuals. And now I ask this model to generate images of people of a diverse background. It probably doesn't know because it hasn't been trained with that. So as you can see, this kind of garbage in, garbage out principle that's what it kind of drives these models to work too. So as a result too, going back to the original kind of paradox, this time the productivity is that, yes, it saves you time, but you have to make sure that what you get back is what you're expecting and that it is correct. Is it right and is it wrong? Now, the next paradox that I want to talk about is basically the accessible elitist too. So kind of think of, again, right, we can now all go to chatgpt.com, let's say, right? There are many models now too you can try out and ask question. Anybody can ask question now or ask it to do things. And oh, that's great, it's an equalizer. However, it's really not an equalizer. The reason is that it's actually asking us to become, kind of knowledgeable. We need to know to ask the right questions, essentially. So basically, too, if you want to truly harness the power, then you actually have to become kind of part programmer and part also a prompt engineer, too. So those who are like, specializing in knowing how you craft up your questions to ask the right questions and expecting to get the outcomes that you need. And also you have to be sort of like a digital wizard too. So we have democratized, right, the access to a tool, all this creativity. It's like giving everybody a Formula One car, but then you really don't know how to drive it. You have to be trained on how to drive it so that you don't crash. And that's essentially what it is. Last of all, too, with this paradox, is basically, if you look at it, we're trying to humanize these machines, and then we also try to essentially humanize the machines, and then we try to also mechanize humans too. So that's actually the greatest irony in this, is that how generative AI is simultaneously making machines more human-like and humans to be more machine-like. So we are now teaching AI to be more creative, more empathetic, and all of the nuanced, right? These are quintessentially very human traits too. But meanwhile, humans too, like us, we actually have to learn how to prompt, ask the right questions. So in other words, we need to kind of think in terms of these prompts and how the models think and all of these things. And it's actually kind of funny because it feels like we're doing this funny dance, we're human beings trying to actually have to become more machine-like and kind of think in terms of the algorithms and ask the right questions. And whereas we're now making the machines to become more humans, to have emotion, but I really don't think it will ever happen. Or maybe if AGI, artificial general intelligence, is possible, then maybe. Okay, so now let's get to this part in which kind of talk about this, is that generative AI is a magnificent mess of contradictions, as you can see. It is a tool that's both revolutionary and redundant, and liberating and also limiting too. And it can be brilliant and also can be clueless. But you know what? Because of this, it's actually very fascinating too. And it's also telling us that, don't shy away from it. We continue to develop and use these technologies. And so let's embrace this absurdity in some sense, right? This contradictory absurdity. So we need to celebrate that we have created something so paradoxical, and it's basically making quantum physics. We can make it look like it's straightforward. You can just ask it too. So after all, too, as such, right? If you kind of think of AI can actually write a speech, and about its own, contradictions. It can actually literally do a lot of other things as well. So maybe one day we'll have an AI comedians that come on stage and kind of complaining how bad the jokes human beings can make too. So, and then with that, I like to say thank you, and also please remind one another to stay human. And don't let AI take control. We are still in control. So thank you very much.